So we talked about loyalty tokens, and there's a existing infrastructure and company that has pretty much nailed that. That's called Socios. If we go back to when Socios was first starting out and when they were getting going, this was in 2020 circa, and they had raised some amount of money. And they were not the only company that was thinking about how to do fan loyalty and engagement. There was another company that was based out of Colombia that wanted to do a very similar type of thing. And they were called Bitsports. And Bitsports was actually going to use Chia. No, I'm not kidding you. There was a project that was just like Socios, and I'm going to blow your mind even harder when I tell you when this was actually coming out. It was in 2021.
Wow. So the problems that are on proof of authority chain, I would assume Bitsports was looking at Chia for the solutions that Chia. Why was Bitsports looking at Chia? Let's start there, Grant.
Well, okay, and I got to set it up just a little bit more than that because, like, how do I even know about this project, and why is it that nobody knows about this within the Chia ecosystem? There are people who definitely do, and if you were to say the word BitSports, there would be a lot of people, even within uh, Chia Network Incorporated (CNI), that would know the name of BitSports because it was a big project when we first started working on it, and I was actually directly involved in it. So let me paint the picture for how this company came to be using Chia. So it was in 2021 when I first got contacted by the visionary and founder who wanted to do this. His name was Nico, and he got a hold of me just in a very direct way, but just out of the blue. So I didn't have any pre-existing relationship with Nico. He reached out to me through some social media channel and said, "Hey, I'm doing this project. Would you be willing to come on as our CTO?" And this was something that at the time I had actually founded a company specifically to do this kind of stuff. So it was called Eurolast. And Eurolast was doing a lot of different Web3 projects. And so we were fairly well known. And I, being somebody who was in the spotlight, was somewhat easy to get a hold of. And so he reaches out to me in late 2021 and says, "We've got this project. We're interested in having you as CTO. What would you be willing to join us?" And so I said, "Well, if you're ready for me, fine. But if not, there's another way we could potentially engage, which is I'll come in here and kind of assess what's going on with your project and see if my company can help you out. And then if it's a good fit and you want me to be a founder and in C-level within the company, I'll certainly do it." And so that's kind of how it started. Is we were just talking about their project and what they wanted to do, and that's, I think, a good place to start with. Like, what was Bitsports even trying to do, and what were they trying to solve? And in some ways, we did somewhat set this up when we first started talking about Socios, because Socios has done something that's very similar to what Bitsports ultimately wanted to do, which was to create a loyalty token and to do this for football teams and to essentially be able to achieve that same goal, which is to have fans connect directly to the sports clubs. And this was all happening in Colombia. And so in late 2021, if you recall, this was at a time when Chia really didn't have a token standard. I mean, it did. It just cats were just launched. I think it was in September. So when these guys first approached me and they said, "This is what we want to do," Chia was not necessarily on the radar. In my mind, it wasn't even the blockchain that I would have recommended using. I mean, definitely me being a fan, a super fan of Chia at the time in 2021. I mean, I really wanted to see it flourish, or really wanted to see it thrive. And so when we first started talking about how might we achieve their goal, I thought about Web3 as a technology, as a platform, as something that you could use to achieve a goal. And you really got to assess the fitness of any particular technology when you're architecting a solution. So that's kind of how we come into this, is saying, how could we achieve your idea of this platform of loyalty token engagement with all these different football teams and the pre-existing relationships that the founders had with doing merchandising and stuff within football in Central and South America. So at when you come in as a technology consultant, you can't just like show your favorite thing. You got to look at this comprehensively. And so my first thought about how, Bitsports might achieve its goals, I said, this is probably going to be like some L2 on Ethereum, like Loopring, or maybe even Solana. Because at the time, Solana was starting to get some of its first primitives down. It was getting some wallet engagement, and it was looking like it was going to be a very big player in the world. Like we hadn't yet had all of the Sam Bankman-Fried stuff hadn't happened yet, and so Solana was definitely an up and comer, and it was being chosen by a lot of the VCs in Silicon Valley, and so it was getting pushed pretty hard, and so it looked like it might be a good fit. So how did we arrive at doing it on Chia was kind of a roundabout way, because one of the first things that they asked us to do when we started working on the project was to do a big bake-off, was to actually pick the blockchain that we wanted to use. And so this activity of trying to pick a blockchain, we did one of those big charts where you say, let's put all the chains we could possibly think of, and then start putting criteria on there to winnow it down and decide which chain we should actually use. And since it was a big effort to put a lot of different chains in the mix, I threw Chia in there because I said, well, we should at least consider this. And during the entire bake-off process where we were all learning about these different chains and comparing them side by side, the team actually chose Chia. And so they wanted to launch on Chia. They had selected it as the blockchain to be used. And there was a bunch of different reasons why it was so attractive at the time. It was definitely very exciting. The mainnet launch had just happened. So that happened in March. We're not that far away from that. We're like 8 or 9 months after mainnet launch of Chia. There was a lot of price exuberance around Chia at the time. If you remember, we launched in May or June. We're at like a token price of something like $1,500. We've seen some loss of token value over time, but we're still trading at something like $300, $400 at the time. And so there's a lot of excitement about Chia. And so launching on this chain where it might be the next green chain. It's just gotten the Climate Action Data Trust. It had a different name at the time, but there was a lot of excitement around the chain, and so the team picked it, and it didn't necessarily have the infrastructure needed to be able to launch this project. It was going to be a risk, and it was going to be a challenge. And so when we said this is the right chain for us to use, we definitely felt that there were going to be bumpy spots that we'd have to surmount. But as far as the primary use case of can we do this loyalty engagement token, it had what we needed. It had the CAT standard had just launched. And when I started asking internally if some of the more grandiose visions that Bitsports had, which was to go beyond just tokens and do stuff with NFTs, it seemed like that might be possible, because there was an NFT standard which was being internally circulated at Chia at the time. It was a Skunkworks project that hadn't necessarily risen to it's going to be the next big thing on Chia. And so it looked like maybe it could long term do the thing that was needed. And that's where the conversations had first started. So this is kind of the setup is we're in late 2021, and they're launching this company, and lo and behold, just a couple months later, this would not only have massive funding, so it raised a couple $1 million in a seed round, it had the backing of a big VC, and it ended up getting the cover of Forbes magazine. So it felt like it was a very exciting project, and for it to have chosen Chia as the blockchain, as a fan of Chia, I was stoked. I was really excited about this project because I thought, man, here we go. We have a big project. It's going to bring all of these sports fans from Central and South America, starting in Colombia. There were a bunch of teams that were already signed up when they came and talked to me, and they had a timeline. They were a full-on technology group that had already been formed, that had drawn from a lot of different countries in Central and South America, and it was all in Spanish. Like the company was run in Spanish. So this is a very exciting thing for me to even be contemplating doing on Chia, because it would have brought an influx of users and a use case to Chia, and it would have done so in 2021, which to me was just a really exciting project. And I was excited to bring it to CNI and to try to engage with the tools that were there at the disposal at the time, which was the Chia Cultivation Grant program, and just the entire ecosystem that was happening and starting to be created at the time. This was before Mint Garden. This was before Dexy. This was before any of these things existed in our modern ecosystem. This project was being conceived of right after the Cat 1 launch standard had happened.
So when the team at Bitsports got excited about Chia, there's sort of like three. When I think about what might excite them about Chia, I think of three main points. One, the green, the eco green consensus, proof of space and time. Also the robustness of Chia Lisp. Also the decentralization. Was there any like one aspect that really excited them, or was it just sort of overall? This is why they opted to go with a new blockchain over something something like Ethereum that had a longer track record.
Ethereum was just still suffering under a lot of gas price pressure. It was still hard to conceive of how you could do something big and comprehensive like this with how much it costs to do any particular little thing on Ethereum. That's why, if you're going to do it, you'd have to do it in some sort of an L2. And that was even something that came up within the context of doing it on Chia. I would say, Lucas, was it the right choice? It was not the obvious right choice. It really wasn't the obvious right choice. But once the team settled on it, sort of just ran with it. That, I mean, you're asking like what really like drove it home. There was no smoking gun, and it was a shock and a surprise to me that the team chose it. Honestly, I really thought that there was not enough stuff done already within Chia, and I thought, given where the entire ecosystem was, that it was going to be a really hard win. And it was a good opportunity for Chia to have a big use case, have a big influx of users, but it wasn't like, oh, Chia was the clear winner. It was more like, oh, surprise, like the team has chosen this and this is what we're going to use. Now let's do a mad scramble to actually figure out how we can pull this off in practice. That's more of what the backdrop was. It wasn't like Chia was the obvious right thing because it was decentralized or secure or anything like that. It was surprising that it was chosen to me.
And after you guys opted to go with Chia for the basis of this new fan token system, uh, what did that look like as you began to build out the concept and to begin to look at Chia and see what was possible and what Chia was capable of doing?
Um, like what Chia was capable of doing was really driving the main use case. It was you need to just be able to create a token, and that token you've got to be able to integrate into a special purpose client that's mostly around team content. So if you think about like what you're trying to build from an application perspective, it's less about it being a wallet and more about it being like a way that fans can see content from the team and then do loyalty type activities for which the tracking of it is all accounted through a token. At the time, there really wasn't a way to obviously build this. We didn't have any sort of we didn't have any sort of libraries like we do now. We didn't have infrastructure to do this. Like it was so early on in the development of Chia that nobody had really tried to do something like this. So it definitely lacked like a wallet SDK. It lacked like any kind of like centralized wallet code that you could use to solve a bunch of problems. And so when the team was confronted with actually leveraging this blockchain, we had to build all of that stuff from scratch. It was really a pretty daunting challenge in a lot of ways, but we felt like we were up to the challenge, and the team that engaged on it, we moved really fast. Like we ended up building these things out with a rapid clip. So all of 2022 was fairly focused on this, at least Q1 and Q2 for sure.
And is this whenever you put together Chia crypto utils. Was it for this project?
Yeah, this actually was the project where Chia Crypto Utils first came into being. So Chia Crypto Utils, as I've talked about in the past, is the the brainchild of Rigidity. So when Rigidity was doing his first project, he did this thing called Arbor Wallet, and it was part of something called the Digital Farming Initiative. And I had been looking at what they were doing, and I said, if we're going to be able to pull this off, like we have to look at this code because it's at least going to give us a bit of a jump start. Because what they had done with Arbor Wallet was they had created a library called Chia Crypto Utils, and it was patterned after some other utils things that had existed. So we looked at that and we said, well, we can use this as a basis of creating an app in Flutter. And that was a technology choice that had already been made. So within Bitsports, when we were starting to work on this, having a Flutter library and having an initial wallet implementation that we could look at was one of the ways that we wanted to get where we needed to go faster, to be able to leverage the open source code that had already been released for wallet and for the underlying infrastructure around doing this sort of Chia style programming to create a client, was really important. Like if we hadn't had that, I would have said, "There's no way. Like let's not even try this. This is too impossible. It's not gonna work." Because we didn't want to just leverage a normal wallet. Like if we were to say, let's try to get Chia into Exodus or something like that, that wasn't the sort of experience that the teams wanted. Like the teams wanted the app to be very focused on the club itself, and then that these loyalty activities were just like a bookkeeping mechanism. And so you really didn't want to start from the premise that you would have some wallet and you'd be collecting tokens across multiple different teams, but rather that you'd be inside the team app and that there were activities that you could do and you're earning points inside of there. And the public blockchain is the way that you're accounting for all this. And so there wasn't like a lot of infrastructure to launch this into, but at least this set of source code existed. And we did say, well, let's take Chia Crypto Utils and let's run with it harder. But a lot of other ancillary things came out of it as well. Some of the technology that Eurolast built out, like Iriga and our full node infrastructure that actually ended up like leading into stuff that we would end up doing later with Evergreen. And so, yeah, this is where all of this tech got built out, was within the scope of Bitsports, so that we could run this federated infrastructure around all these different clubs wanting to be able to do their own sports engagement loyalty stuff, and doing it on top of the Cat1 standard, all on top of the Chia Asset Token infrastructure, and that we would have created all of these tokens for these different clubs, and that those Chia Asset Tokens would then be used in a special purpose client that would be powered by Chia Crypto Utils, and that we would have learned from how to create an app like this by looking at what Arbor Wallet had done. That's sort of the setup of what Bitsports was launching into within the ecosystem of Chia at the time.
And what did the development across like the horizon of Chia look like at the time? CNI would have been present. Were there other projects or was there other development that was going on to sort of add to what tools that you might have as at hand as you built out this project?
So one of the big programs at the time was the Chia Cultivation Grant program. And I mean, it was fostering stuff in the ecosystem. So I think some of the early winners of these was like Hash.Green, and there was the Nucle wallet. I mean, this is reaching way back into the deep beginnings of what the ecosystem looked like, and how it was developing at the time. We didn't have Tibet Swap, we didn't have Dexy, we had this other stuff that existed, and even offers were stuff that was just starting to come into its own, and being understood, because until you have a cat, an offer doesn't really mean anything. Like, what are you offering? You're not offering anything for anything until you have the cat standard. So even as the cat standard was first released, this is when offers start to have some meaning, because now you can swap XEH for a token or a token for a token trustlessly and peer to peer. So this type of stuff, even though it was developed before mainnet launch in Chia in a different form. It took a new form when the CAT standard actually came out, and so this is what existed at the time. Was the CNI was working on a couple of big projects that they had been referring to pretty with regular updates where they were mentioning asteroids and Atari and these projects that they had intended that would launch soon on Chia. One of which eventually became what we know today as the Climate Action Data Trust, but at the time I think it was called Climate Warehouse. And so this is the backstop for what was existing at the time around any projects launching. I didn't really know of anything else that was on this level other than something like Asteroids and Atari and what they were doing at the Digital Farming Initiative with Arbor Wallet.
And you said this was just as the CAT standard was coming on, so no NFT standard, and that's why no Dexy, no Mint Garden, but also no NFT projects, none of the no Chia Friends or any of the like either.
Right. That was to come later. So it was, I think in some way there was thoughts of doing NFT style stuff internally at CNI, and there was a Skunkworks project that was being championed by a couple of people that were internal to Chia, but it didn't have like a top level focus like what we see in the all hands on deck that's happening with Permuto now. That actually would come into the first half of 2022 is when this idea of launching NFTs would actually become the focus of CNI for quite some time. Like a lot of 2022 is dominated by the launch of the NFT1 standard, how it might be used, and then a lot of different incarnations of like what NFT1 would be used for. Definitely, Bitsports had the idea for using NFTs. NFTs were front and center in what Bitsports wanted to do. And so the early conversations that I had with CNI really focused on how is NFT actually going to work and starting to get some momentum around actually having NFTs available so that we could use it at Bitsports. Because one of the things that we wanted to do was to be able to do sports cards. We wanted to be able to do the effectively digital trading cards on the Chia blockchain and have players represented, and that the NFT standard would be used for making like a digital sports card, like a basketball card or like a hockey card, but doing it for football teams. And so we had actually created mock-ups. We had these graphics around how we were going to do the players themselves, and that's our use case for NFTs. And we were definitely talking with CNI through that first quarter of 2021 about how NFT might come on the stage and be ready for us when we actually wanted to start doing our next phase, which was after tokens.
So you developed through Q1 and Q2. What had Bitsports, what had Airlast and Bitsports made? What did you get built? What was possible by say the end of Q2, and what was your experience up to that point?
So a lot of the focus in the first quarter of 2021 was just working on this fundamental use case. So it was ensuring that we had the infrastructure to be able to build the app, to do identity, so that we could have the fans actually come in here and do certain things, have the teams be able to come in and do certain things, setting up the content management. It was like just a straight up software development project with this idea that you would have this infrastructure and the template for how you would bring each of these teams online, and that under the hood there was a very specific kind of database that would keep track of the tokens. That's how you can think about databases fundamentally, and it's how you should think about Web3 as a special purpose kind of a database. Like that's essentially what Web3 is. It's a very specific kind of database, and it keeps track of tokens or NFTs or whatever else. And so the app that we were building throughout Q1 and Q2 was focused around these use cases for the specific teams themselves, and that Chia would be integrated into it. And we were definitely making progress towards that. We had the Chia ecosystem built out in the back end. So we had this ability to have a reliable full node infrastructure that our app could talk to. It was capable of doing an onboarding flow where you would do a couple taps and it would create your mnemonic seeds and it would save things off so that you could actually have your private keys and your keychain to be able to interact with Chia. We could make spend bundles. We were on the back end making tokens for the teams, so we were able to mint cats. We were doing all of this stuff on testnet, and it was all functional and kind of working the way that we had wanted it to. So we had achieved a lot of success in actually doing everything that was up through the Cat 1 standard and being able to regularly interact with Chia, and the thought towards how NFTs would work when they actually came online, and having discussions with CNI about our use case for NFTs and how we would envision using them and the kind of tools that we would need to use NFTs at an industrial scale to be able to mint a lot of these things, to be able to do auctions, to be able to have whitelists and sales, and how all of that could work within the context of offer files. It really had a lot of promise, because if you think about the kind of stuff that it what ended up being built out in the Chia ecosystem, we were thinking about all of that stuff all the way back to Q4 of 2021. So the first half of 2022 was us building out this tech, bringing on our first club teams, and starting to achieve the goals that we had wanted and had set out. And so if you ask the question, like kind of where did it go? That's an interesting part of the story. But as far as where we're at right now, that was just the promise of how this could actually work and getting it integrated. And that's what all of like January, February, and March looked like for this project. Was we were just, wheels on the ground, funded, and everything was just going as well as it possibly could.
Well, I'm wondering, of course, where it went, because we've never seen Bitsports, but I was also leading into sort of the end of Q2, because the NFT1 standard was introduced in June 29th of 2022. So how did your expectations, or Bitsports' expectations, and the discussion about the creation of that standard, how did that go in the discussion of the creation, and then like your expectations as that standard was released?
Yeah, so just to kind of put this into perspective, so here we are, November 15th, 2021, and that's when the Cat 1 standard comes out. So I've been following this very closely. So my engagement with Bitsports was around this time. So I knew that the Cat 1 standard was coming out. I knew the horizon for it, and it came out just fast enough that we were able to start using it, and we were using it from day one. So my focus was in largely onboarding the entire team into the Chia ecosystem. I taught Chia to so many developers. Like, we would just go through these online training things. We would get their environment set up so they could actually interact with it. We stood up the infrastructure so that we could plug their development environment into it, plug all of the infrastructure into it, and get cats working and have all this infrastructure coordinated and working on testnet. Like, we were doing it. As far as NFT1, so once we started to make noise about wanting to use NFTs, it was in that first quarter of 2022 that Chia started to formulate their ideas around how they wanted to do NFT. So NFT development started with this internal project at CNI. It started to blossom a little bit more when we got interested in it, and there was a buzz about Bitsports internally at CNI. We actually had internal Keybase teams that were formulated. I was interacting with a bunch of different people at CNI, various different program managers, business development, and one of the individuals who ended up actually championing the NFT standard internally at Chia, which was Richard Tsao, which was eFishSend. He was the one that I was working with in trying to let him know all the use cases that we had for NFT so that when it came out, we would be able to leverage NFT1. So NFT1, I think it came out in June of 2022, if I recall correctly. I'll try to pull that up in a second. And so it was during that whole first half when we were articulating what we wanted NFTs to do and how we were going to use them. We were definitely there at the table and were players in this entire development of how NFT1 was going to work. And this was during a lot of exuberance in the NFT world. And so it really gave Chia a chance to go step on the stage and say, well, we have an NFT standard as well. And one of the big claims to fame, which we've recently had a chance to talk about, was the fact that royalties were going to be baked into it. And that really drove a lot of our thinking internally at Bitsports, was how NFTs could work, how they'd be leveraged, and this whole royalties ecosystem being a big part of what the teams would eventually see revenue from, was that these NFTs would get traded around, and when they got traded, they would be getting these royalties off of the secondary sales. And so as we started to do our internal modeling for how the entire ecosystem would work, we definitely had royalties as a big part of how this would play out in the longer term if we were successful in creating these sports cards and creating what we wanted to do with the entire use case set internally at Bitsports, using NFTs to represent players and then allowing those players to be put into sorts of games within like a fantasy football type of style. Here, assemble your players together, and then whatever they would get points for, your fan team competing against other fan teams, and that there would have been a game around it. And obviously, we were thinking about things like betting and some other stuff that could come later, but it all really started with this idea of fan tokens, loyalty engagement, NFTs representing the players, and then further, if we could actually start to achieve ticketing, because a lot of these teams felt like there was a better way to do ticketing, and that if Web3 could offer a solution, that they'd be very excited about it. So ticketing was something that we started talking about very, very early on in the process as well. And it was really one of my first chances to interact with some of the people at CNI that would later drive big projects. And so ticketing was another big component of what we wanted to use NFTs for.
Well, let's talk about ticketing in a second, but beforehand, you said Richard Sau sort of took up the torch for the NFT1 standard from within CNI. What were those conversations like, and do you know if there were other projects that were lobbying for the creation of the standard at the same time?
I didn't have a lot of visibility to the internal processes at Chia. That isn't something that I think has really ever been possible unless you're on the inside of Chia. I just raised up what I wanted to do, and they gave us a seat at the table for discussing it. But there were other people who were also brought in for that kind of, facility. I remember Aceville being a part of those conversations. I remember Gobi being a part of those conversations. So these things were, the way it was developed was very much in like a consortium, or it was like a small working group that got put together to provide feedback into the standard that was being created. That's kind of how I would think about it. It was more of like a working group that was being brought together, but I didn't really have a lot of visibility to the other projects that might have used the NFT1 standard. I think Mint Garden was, a big thing that they were thinking would get launched, like a successor or a competitor to OpenSea.
Well, and let's back up a little bit. You mentioned earlier that you had talked about CNI's cultivation grants for projects that were coming onto the Chia blockchain. Did Bitsports end up getting awarded one of those grants, or was the relationship more distant than that?
It didn't, which was like one of the things that ended up causing this all to implode. Honestly, if I were to say, like, what was one of the things that made this project not successfully launch on Chia, it was because support from the chain and from CNI didn't happen the way that some of the VCs expected it to. And that's part of, I think, the dirty little secret of about how a lot of Web3 stuff ended up happening was, what projects were able to fund things because they had these tokens that they could throw around. And the tokens that they could throw around created some of this astroturfed projects that couldn't have existed if they just had to go raise the money on their own and exist without the support of leeching off of the community in some sense. And so Bitsports did not get a cultivation grant, didn't get support from CNI in any substantive way, and that ultimately ended up causing the project to switch from using Chia and then eventually not getting launched at all.
Oh, wow. But you said earlier that that Bitsports had come to the table with their own seed round and investment. And that's did they get that investment later, or what was the timeline of the money coming into the project?
So the money came into Bitsports independently of Chia. Like it raised its own money because on the strength of the idea itself and the co-founders who were in it. So Nico and Tatiana raised money for this idea completely independent of the chain itself. Like the idea had merit and the teams wanted to do it, and they had the right connections to the teams that made this work. So it really didn't have anything to do particularly with Chia driving the raise of the company. It's not like what happened with Berkeley Compute. This was Bitsports raised money, got the cover of Forbes magazine, and did all of that stuff independent of CNI, and was really bringing its own money, development, marketing, and user base to the table, independent of asking Chia for anything other than how do you use this tech and how do you make it work right.
Wow. Um, so and you said that well, as we are unaware of Bitsports more
Well,
generally
actually, I
today.
think I think that might be all the time that we've got. So that I think that's the next part of the story is what actually happened. Like, why don't we have a fan loyalty thing similar to Socios on Chia? What happened and what went wrong? That's maybe the next part of this.
Okay, that sounds um I would be interested to hear that story. Before we turn to that, also ticketing. Did you guys ever build out ticketing, or did everything go belly up before you got to that aspect of it?
So we had an idea for how we could do ticketing. The sort of one of the problems you need to solve with ticketing is you need to make ticketing real time. I mean, if you think about going into a venue and you walk up with your barcode or your code and somebody zaps it with a reader, that's got to happen instantaneously. And so if you're going to use an NFT that's on a blockchain and you have to mark it used, that marking it used isn't something you can do on chain. You definitely can't do some kind of a coin spend and wait for that to settle out to say that two people haven't used the same ticket to try to gain access. And so you've got to come up with something that could be much more real time than waiting for the L1 to settle out and say that this NFT ticket has been used for attendance. And so using something like data layer to achieve ticketing is something that we had a specification for. We had an idea for how we could do it, but it was a longer term goal. So it was something that we were intending to launch like Q3, Q4 of 2022. So by the time that the project imploded, we hadn't really gotten to it yet, but at least we'd done some of the design work and we had an idea for how it could work.
Well, let's pick up next time and talk about what happened with the implosion and where Bitsports went after they left Chia.
All right, we'll pick it up there next time.